Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afuraitkaitnit, Neye, AKANFO NANASOM, Da, Medende Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan, Akwamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, Mu, Odwiraman, Mu. Greetings to all Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is AKANFO NANASOM Day, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion Day. My name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan, Odwirafo of the Akwamu nation in North America, within Odwiraman, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We've opened up the chat room. If you have any questions or comments in the chat room and you'd like to interact, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, simply hit number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised so we can interact. For those who are new to the broadcast, we have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have AKANFO NANASOM, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Joda on Monday nights, where we deal specifically with the Akhan expression of ancestral religion, first and foremost because we are Akhan, secondly because of the misinformation being propagated regarding Akhan ancestral religion, cosmology, culture, philosophy, ritual practice, and so forth, not only from individuals on the continent in the Western Hemisphere, but also on the continent of Afuraitkaitnit, those who have been infected with pseudo-religions such as Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, and so forth, white culture in general, those who have been infected. That infection manifests in their presentation of Akhan ancestral religion. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akhan ancestral religion, dealing with our ancestral origins in ancient Khanat, the Khan land. Khan land is a title of ancient Nubia. Khan meaning first or foremost from the beginning. We originated in Khanat, the Khan land, thousands of years ago at the fall of ancient Kemet and northern Khanat, ancient Egypt and northern Nubia. Some of our people migrated from ancient Khanat, the Khan land, and moved to the western part of the continent, reestablished ourselves and reestablished the Khanat Empire, the Empire of Ghana, a couple of thousand years ago. Because of invasions hundreds of years later, some of our people migrated further south to reestablish Akana civilization in the savanna and forest belt regions of what is contemporary Ghana and Ivory Coast. Hundreds of years subsequent to those migrations, some of our people were forced into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. Thus, we ended up in North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe. This is how our Khan people ended up in the West. However, we maintained our ancestral religious traditions. Thus, in the South America, amongst the Akhan people in South America, in Suriname, Akhan ancestral religion is called Winti, from the Akhan term Winti. In Jamaica, Akhan ancestral religion is called Obia, from the Akhan term Obai. In the United States, in North America, Akhan ancestral religion is called Hoodoo, from the Akhan term Undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life, root work, and so forth. It also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. We also use the term conjure. These terms, of course, are Akhan, the term Undu, as well as the term Kanche, meaning to utter incantations to bring the spirits forward. We find these exact same terms in the language of ancient Kanit and Kemet. You find the term Undu meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. You also find the term Undu meaning to become heavy with the spirit. You also find that the term Undu means the offerings given to the deities and ancestral spirits on the shrines, which are also called the Undu. So we give our Undu or our Hoodoo to the shrines, to the divinities in ritual practice in ancient Kemet. One of the terms from ancient Nubia, Khanat, is also the Undu land, and the people called the Undu people. So we've been using these terms, Udu and Kanche, for thousands of years across the continent of Afuraitkaitnit into North America. So this is what we deal with on AKANFO NANASOM. Our 3 other broadcasts are Ojira on Tuesday nights, Benada Abinada Tuesday nights. Ojira means purification. We deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akhan expression, but ancestral religion, no matter what form it takes, as it manifests in the clans of our people, wherever we exist in the world, wherever we have migrated or forced to migrate. We maintain our ancestral religious practices in our blood circles. We deal with Ojira purification and how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives as Afuraitkaitnit people wherever we exist in the world. Ancestral religion, in essence, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to align our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, these are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. We state that Ojira purification operationalizes Nanasom. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating law and ritually restoring balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions. As we seek to execute our divine function in creation, given to us by the Supreme Being, each and every one of us is Afuraitkaitnit people only. We seek to align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. This is our ancestral culture. This is our way of life. When we make legitimate mistakes, we engage the ritual process. We say legitimate mistakes, we engage the ritual process to incorporate divine law and restore divine balance, and thus we get back on track, executing our divine function in creation. Our culture is the divine law or love of order, the acceptance of divine order, the law or love of order. And law and love is the same term. The love of order and the hate, the rejection of disorder. Accepting order, rejecting disorder and its purveyors. Expansive and contractive. As we seek to align every thought, intention, and action with divine order, we purify ourselves through the ritual process to perpetually engage that kind of behavior and lifestyle. We show how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives. That's what we deal with on the Ojira broadcast, dealing with texts and purification of concepts, purification of cosmology, purification of ritual practice, and so forth. It is these ancestral religious practices that we maintained in our blood circles that empowered us and guided us as Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere on the best means by which to wage war against the whites and their offspring, force the end of enslavement through taking up metal armaments, as well as using chemical and biological warfare, root work being the precedent established by our people for chemical and biological warfare in the Western Hemisphere. We utilize these methods to wage war against our enemies, the whites and their offspring, and massacre them, force the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere. So we deal with that on Ojira. On Awukuda Wednesday night, we have Egua Marketplace, where we showcase Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who are serving the Afuraitkaitnit community in a positive capacity, those who maintain their ancestral religious values in the context of their service to our community. We showcase one business, organization, or institution per week for optimal capital infusion, as stated in our OKRA economic development model, which is an economic development model rooted in our ancestral religious values. Thus, it is a holistic approach to economic development. Part of that operation is Starve the Beast and Feed the Pride, where we take an assessment on the kinds of funds we potentially would have wasted with the whites and their offspring in the course of a week. Then we Starve the Beast and Feed the Pride, reallocate those funds to the business, organization, or institution of the week. The business of the week this week is Asase Hills, owned by Ama Asase Ajay. She came on the show last week, and you can listen to that broadcast, details about the business and so forth. this week is her business, Asase Heals, HoodooWomb.com. Please support that business, starve the beast, and feed the pride. Redirect the funds you would have spent, $10 or $15 in the course of a week, with the whites in our spring. Starve that white beast and feed the pride. If we do not engage that process on a weekly basis, then the $20 billion we spend weekly, we're still going to continue to spend 95% of that with the whites and their offspring and less than 5% with our own people. When we engage that misguided behavior, then we are financing our own oppression. We need to starve the beast and feed the pride and take at least 10% of that $20 billion per week that we spend and redirect it to our businesses, organizations, and institutions. $2 billion being redirected to black businesses, organizations, and institutions weekly. It's simply you taking 10% of the money you spend on a weekly basis, starve the beast, and feed the pride. Redirect 10% of everything you normally would spend, deliberately seek out a black business, organization, or institution, and plug that 10% there. The business of the week, once again, is Asase Heals, owned by Ama Asase Ajay. And then we, of course, the week previous, we had Afia Asase Bretuo with Hoodoo Pharmacy and Conjure Culture and Couture. So you will see her interview on the YouTube page as well as our Blog Talk page. You will see Ama Asase Ajay's interview on the Blog Talk page as well as our YouTube page. You can listen to those 2-hour interviews all about the businesses and so forth, and you can support those businesses. On our Yada broadcast, Thursday broadcast, also called Yada Abada Thursday night, we have Ama and Sim Affairs of the Nation, where we deal with issues confronting us specifically as an Oman, a nation, but specifically as Odwiraman, the purified Odwiraman nation. Mine also means land of the west, the setting sun. So Odwiraman is the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the west, the land of the setting sun. Those of us who are descendant of our ancestresses and ancestors who were forced into the Western Hemisphere, but we maintained our ancestral religious practices, waged war against the whites and their offspring, and forced the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere. Because we were forced into the Western Hemisphere at some point, we were directed by our ancestresses and ancestors to coalesce in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body, blend ancestral blood circles in that specific region, interface with the Earth Mother divinities in that region of their bodies, interface with the unique expression of the Obosom, Marisha, Voodoo, the divinities, the forces in nature as they manifest in this region of the western region of the Earth Mother's body, deal with the plant life, animal life, mineral life for food, as well as medicine, as well as the spirit totems, Achinebois, animal totems of plant life and plant totems, mineral totems, animal totems, and so forth. That confluence of events and behavior allowed us to forge a locative identity rooted in our existence in the western region of the Earth Mother's body, our interface with the forces in nature, and our blending of ancestral blood circles. We have forged a unique expression of Afuraitkaitnit experience, culture, ancestral religious practice, divination, and so forth, revolution, resolution. We also have a unique approach to solving our problems, our issues as an Oman, because we recognize the truth of what an Oman, a nation, is, which is a living, breathing entity governed by specific Obosom forces in nature. When we harmonize with that force in creation that governs our unique collective that was brought into being by the direction of the Nsamafo and Obosom, the ancestral spirits and deities, that unique coalition of Afuraitkaitnit people governed by specific forces in creation forges an Oman, a nation, an entity. When we live in harmony with that entity and with one another, then we understand what an Oman, a nation, truly is. So we deal with Amaniye nationism, which is the purification of nationalism. Amaniye nationism, understanding what a nation is in the true sense from its spiritual, cosmological foundations, and engage in the nation-building restoration process rooted in those foundations. So that's what we deal with on Ama and Sim Affairs of the Nation. So tonight, AKANFO NANASOM, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion. Before we get started with that, we're going to have a couple of announcements. Our AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference, Afuraitkaitnit Africa and Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference, the third annual, is coming up March 24th weekend. We will have an update by the end of the night, tomorrow night, by tomorrow night's broadcast. As you, some of you know, we needed to shift the venue for that. So we're still in the process of that confirmation, shifting from a previous venue to a different venue. So once we get those details, then we can update everyone as to the specific time frame and so forth of that weekend of March 24th. So we'll bring you up to date on that. You can check the AKYISAN page for updates as well. We still have our fundraiser for the AKYISAN conference. Of course, the conference is free. We have presentations on Hoodoo, Akan Ancestral Religion in North America, Juju, which is the Yoruba Ancestral Religion in North America. Wakili Oyinola will be presenting on that, and that system of divination from her blood circle, dealing with the sacred stones of Asase Afua, of Onile, the Earth Mother, and so forth. And we'll have Voodoo Queen Kalinda Laveau out of New Orleans will be presenting on the Voodoo tradition, ancestral Voodoo from Louisiana that has existed for hundreds of years here in North America. Prior to the Haitian migration, Voodoo already existed in the blood circles of our people in North America. So we will be presenting on these different areas. Of course, the conference is free. We'll be giving away a free copy of our new book that will be released on that day, the AKYISAN book, Volume 3, to all attendees. So it's a free conference. You receive a free book. We'll have vendors throughout the course of the day, our Egwa Marketplace vendors. We do have our fundraising piece for that, our crowdfunding piece for that, because we're shifting the venue because of the increased cost and so forth. We need some assistance with that. This is the first time, this year is the first time we had a crowdfunding effort for our conferences. We have 3 conferences on a yearly basis: Odwiraman, Hoodoo Nation Festival in October, the AKYISAN event, Ancestral Religious Reversion in March around the equinox, and then we have the Odwiraman, Afashe, the Nationism Conference, Odwiraman, the Purified Nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere Conference dealing with Amadiye Nationism, the purification of nationalism and nation building from a firm foundation. We have that conference in June around the summer solstice. So this is our 3rd annual AKYISAN. We just had our 3rd annual Odwiraman, Hoodoo Nation Festival this past October. We'll be having the 3rd annual Odwiraman Purified Nation Conference dealing with nationism this June. This year is the first time we've had a crowdfunding effort to support putting on these free conferences, including publishing the free books and giving away the free books. We've given away close to 2,000 free copies of our softcover books to different events. So free admission, free books, and connecting with everyone and so forth, but we need some assistance with that. So if you would like to support our effort, we'll place the link in the chat room, and we'll get back to that at the end of the broadcast. If people have questions about that, we'll just put that in the chat room right now. All right. Okay, so tonight's broadcast, Meretsegert. So you have Meretsegert or Sekari. There's different ways to pronounce it. Sometimes people say Meretsegert, Meretsegert. We said Meretsegert because Sekrai or Sekari is the pronunciation that we find for the root of the term in the Akhan language, but there are different dialects, different languages across the continent, so there are different pronunciations. So we would say Meretsegert or Sekrai, different pronunciation. So this divinity, Meretsegert, is a sacred, manifests as a sacred serpent divinity. In ancient Kemet, her term or her name is defined as she who loves or desires silence. So we want to talk about the purificatory power of solitude as governed by this divinity, also in relation to the Okraguare soul washing ritual that you find in the Akhan tradition, but across Afuraitkaitnit cultures, washing of the soul, the divinity in the head region, cleansing your head and so forth, ritually for clarity so you can make proper decisions. Now, what we just did less than an hour ago, we updated the image for the show. So when you see the image that we put forward for the show, there are different manifestations of the divinity, of this Obosom, of this goddess Meretsegert or Sekrai. We have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and actually 6 now images compiled in that one image for her. And we want to look at those images first and foremost. So first and foremost, you see her as a female serpent divinity, the body of that sacred cobra, and then the head of the female. And of course, she's wearing her crown with the solar disc in the middle of the cow's horns and so forth. So that's one manifestation. You also see her simply manifest as a serpent with that same crown. Just below that, then you also see an individual praising her simply in the form of a serpent without the crown. You also see her as a woman standing there with the head of a serpent. So one is a serpent with the head of a woman. One is a woman with the head of the serpent. There's also images of her where she's simply a woman and her crown has a serpent on there. And then you see a mountain right in the middle. This mountain with a peak in the same form of a meru, of a mer, of a pyramid, and so forth. And then inside the mountain, we have another image. So, first looking at the name of the divinity. Merit means desire, quote-unquote love, but talking about desire in the real sense. And then Segarit or Sekrai, at the Se or Sa is a causative, making something to happen. And then Gari or Geri, that means silence. So Segarit or Sagari or Sakrai means to cause something to become silent, but silent also meaning still, peaceful, unmoved, and so forth. So Merit, the one who desires, Segari, silence, or to make something silent. Silence in the sense of silencing something or becoming silent, but also in the active sense of silencing another entity. And that has to do with the serpent power. You see the serpent power dealing with wisdom and illumination with the solar disc on the crown, that illuminated crown and so forth. But then it's also a fire-spitting cobra, a serpent, a divine killer. And that's also dealing with silencing your enemies. So you can silence yourself, engage in solitude for internal cleansing, enlightenment, empowerment, and so forth, but you can also silence your enemies. You can silence the internal discordance and control that and eradicate that within yourself, but you can also silence your enemies externally. So we're dealing with both in that reality. But we want to look first and foremost at the central image, which is the peak. That is a sacred mountain in ancient Kemet. The term for pyramid is Mer in ancient Kemet, Merkut and so forth, but Mer meaning pyramid, the sanctuary of the deceased, and Mer, of course, is the origin of the term Mor, and that's why, we wrote our whole book. Mor means dead. And then you have people who are physically dead, who are called Mer, plural Meru, corrupted into Mor, the physically dead, also the damned and so forth, that those physically dead who are in a negative condition in the spirit realm. And you also have the socially dead, those who are Mer or corrupted into Mor, those who are bondsmen, vassals, suffering, slaves, and so forth. So socially dead as well as physically dead and spiritually dead and so forth. We wrote our book, More Means Dead, and we proved that conclusively. So fools who are running around calling themselves Moors are really calling themselves mentally, spiritually enslaved and dead. So Mer, mispronounced Mor, but Mer meaning the pyramid, the sanctuary of the deceased. But then that peak, that mountain peak, that mountain peak is the sacred central shrine for Meretsegert. That sacred divinity is called the Western Mountain Peak. It's the Western Mountain of Ptah, so-called Thebes, Waset, and so forth. This was her sacred peak. This is the sanctuary of this serpent divinity where she took up a residence. It was in the form of a mare. Of course, her name Meret means to desire, but then Mer meaning pyramid, sanctuary of the dead, and so forth. That magnetic force that draws that, keeps the energy of that spirit grounded within the shrine of the deceased and so forth. So when you have a mummified body, even that term is Meret, the mummified dead and so forth. When that body is mummified, purified, crystallized, and so forth, it becomes like a crystal, literally. This is why we engage the mummification process. We crystallize the body, and it becomes a crystal or a shrine that draws magnetically the spirits of the living family members to that space. When we invoke the ancestor or ancestors who used to inhabit that body, we ritually prepare the body and so forth. That body that they used to dwell in is the greatest magnet for their spirits. When we engage in ancestral ritual at their shrine where their body is buried and so forth, and their body is properly treated, it becomes the greatest magnifier of their energy, that greatest magnet to draw their spirit from the ancestral realm to come to the physical realm where we are, so we can have a direct communication with this ancestor or ancestors. Sometimes they just show up so we can see them clairvoyantly. Sometimes they possess people in ritual dance and ritual song and through divination and spirit possession and so forth when we engage in ancestral ritual. So magnetically, we draw this deceased spirit to this space. And a mer, a pyramid, sanctuary of the deceased, mer meaning desire, that desire, that draw, that magnetism, drawing that spirit to that space and so forth. So Meret is the feminine form, Mer is the male form, just like Ra and Ra'et, or Ra'it, Mer and Meret, and so forth. So she desires or draws silence. Now, that's the Western mountain in Western Ta'apet, or so-called Thebes or Waset. So that's very critical to her functioning. Before we get into the specific aspects of the cosmology that the whites in our spring have no knowledge of, so this information, of course, like many of the other things we have talked about, will be part of an upcoming publication. But we're releasing this information first tonight, just so the information can be out to show the nature and function of this deity, but it will be part of an upcoming publication, and the specifics of who this divinity is and where she's found in the body and so forth. This is the first time it's being put forward. White Egyptologists don't understand her function or who she is in the body. They think she's just a minor deity and so forth. And the same thing with black chematologists and so forth. They don't know who Meretsegert is. So we're going to give that information tonight. But before we get into those specifics, what is some basic information that you see about or read about her on different sites and so forth, talking about this divinity? They'll say Meretsegert or Meretsegert, the divinity of the necropolis at Ta'apet, Waset, so-called Thebes, fourth nome of Sepat in Upper Kemet. Her name means she who loves silence. She was believed to live on the mountain which dominates the skyline at Ta'apet, so-called Thebes, and rises above the valley of the kings and queens. The mountain known as Nehem formed a natural pyramid. The word for pyramid in Egyptian was Mer, which formed a pun on the first syllable of her name, Mer or Meret. She was given the epithet, she who is upon her mountain, and was sometimes thought of as the personification of the mountain itself, as the peak of the west, and known as Dehenet Amenteru, the peak of the west. She was often associated with Ptah, the patron of the workmen at that specific region, which they now call Deir el Medina. She was a protective divinity, also greatly feared. The workmen of the necropolis left numerous stelae dedicated to her. They believed she would strike down anyone who desecrated a tomb as well as anyone who committed a crime or broken oath. So she's governing this western mountain. The west is the land of the setting sun. The west is the land, the gateway to the ancestresses and ancestors. She desires silence, someone who's desecrating the tomb or desecrating the silence and so forth. She strikes them down, as well as anyone who committed a crime or broken oath. It was thought that she could cause immediate blindness or inflict a snake or scorpion bite on the guilty party. However, she was merciful and could cure anyone, Afuraitkaitnit people only, of course, who repented and promised to atone for their actions. Of course, there's a cause and effect. So when they talk about repenting and atoning in the Christian sense, there's no such thing as you engage in a great deal of debauchery, and then at the end of your life, you repent to the fake little Jesus deity and everything is forgiven and you go to heaven. That nonsense doesn't happen. So, but when we get in alignment with the divinity, suffer the consequences for our actions, realign ourselves, then we can get back in alignment. And she facilitates that process. And then they talk about the stele of Nefer Abu, where he had a stele directed towards her and so forth. We'll read from that stele in a minute. They talk about her worship was popular in Ta'apet, so-called Thebes, and Deir el Medina, the workmen's village near the Valley of the Kings during the New Kingdom, and a small temple to Ptah and Meretsegert was built nearby. Then they say, however, she was so closely associated with the necropolis at Thebes that her worship was never established elsewhere. When the royal necropolis was abandoned during the 25th First Dynasty, she drifted into obscurity. Now, that's their assessment, and you'll find that across the board. She's a force in nature, a divinity. She's not drifting into obscurity. She's a divinity that we still invoke, and one of the forces in creation that, of course, we are cells within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. As cells, we are dependent on the organs that regulate the great divine body. She's one of those divine organs that we are dependent upon. So there's no such thing as her falling into obscurity. They simply don't know who she is, and some of our people repeat that nonsense. Now, let's get back to that definition and the imagery. She's the goddess of the necropolis at Thebes, meaning the land of the west, the setting sun, the cemetery, and so forth. She who loves silence, the mountain that dominates. She's known as Dehent Amentet, or the peak, the mountain peak of the west, and that mountain looks like a pyramid, as you can see. What is the peak in the west that has to do with the end or death or going into the underworld, and also has something to do with silence that we're dependent upon? If you look at the image of the broadcast, it's right there under the mountain. What that image is 4 different images. It is a symbol of the epiglottis. And if you look at the epiglottis, it looks like a hooded cobra. The epiglottis is an organ, of course, that we are totally dependent upon. So that they'll say it's a leaf shape, but it's a cobra, a hooded cobra-shaped organ. What is the epiglottis? It's the flap of tissue found at the most superior part of the larynx or the voice box. Remember we talked, she's called she who desires silence, or the lover of silence. It's at the superior part of the larynx. It is anchored by the epiglottic cartilage, which is an elastic type. It acts as a gatekeeper who closes and protects the gate, the airway, from outsiders, foods and drinks, and directs it into the proper direction, the esophagus. During swallowing, the laryngeal muscles are pulled up, and the tongue presses the epiglottis into the glottis, directing the foods and drinks to the esophagus and preventing them to be aspirated into the lungs. Once the food is moves past through the epiglottis, it flaps back to its resting state so that the remaining food remnants in the area will not be able to go to the larynx or the voice box. For further protection, cough reflex is stimulated in the presence of food, drinks, dust, or small particles in the larynx. So you have this serpent divinity, this serpent structure that closes off the trachea so that food can go into the esophagus, closes off also the opens and closes with regard to the trachea when you're dealing with the air coming up from the trachea. So in linguistics, when something is called a glottal stop, talking about the epiglottis and the glottis, when something is called a glottal stop, meaning you're cutting off the air when you're making certain sounds, the epiglottis is directly related to shutting those sounds off. She who loves silence or brings silence about. When you say uh-oh or stop or hit, when you say hut and you cut it off, the epiglottis went over the trachea. That serpent covered the trachea and created silence. When you look in ancient Kemet and you see the great mother divinity, Nut, bent over the earth divinity, Geb, and we're talking about Geb as the earth divinity. We're talking specifically about the crust of earth. Of course, the black soil substance of earth is Alsar, and the red soil substance is Set. But then you have the earth mother divinities, Asase Nebetepet and Asase Nebetpet, who are called Asase Afua and Asase Ya, the earth mother divinities in Akhan and Onile and Yewa, these earth mother divinities in the Yoruba tradition. Those are the earth mother divinities, but the crust of the earth is Geb, and Nut is the atmosphere. She's bent over Geb in an arch and so forth. You can see the stars through her body and so forth because she's the atmosphere surrounding the earth and so forth. And what you'll see is her face in the west, and then you see her birth canal near the east. She gives birth to the Aten, the sun, in the east, and it comes out of her birth canal in the east. It sails across the sky from east to west, and then it sets in the west, and then she swallows the sun, the Aten, the Atenit, in the west, and then the sun goes into the underworld for the 12 hours of the night and sails in the underworld. And Ra becomes Afura, and he switches from an avian animal, a falcon-headed divinity, to a flat-horned ram and earth divinity, a land animal and so forth, for the 12 hours of night when he's in the world. Then at sunrise, he switches from the flat-horned ram, earth animal, land animal, to back to the avian animal, the falcon and so forth, gets in the boat of the sun and goes back up into the sky and flies across and transforms from Afura back to Ra. But Nut swallows the Aten, the Atenit, the sun, in the west. She swallows the sun at night. That is the end. That's the west. That's when the sun sets and goes into the underworld. And they show her face, and she's swallowing the sun. In the west, the western mountain peak is Meretsegert or Sakrai. She's the epiglottis when Nut is swallowing the Aten, the Atenit, the sun. Part of that process is the epiglottis covering up the trachea so that the sun can go into the quote-unquote underworld of the body. When you look at the epiglottis from the front, it is in the form of a peak inside of the mouth, right near the back of the tongue and so forth. That is the peak of the mountain that you see. That is the sacred mountain of Meretsegert in ancient Kemet. It is the land of the west, the setting sun. When the sun goes into the underworld, when you swallow food, just like Nut is swallowing with the sun, and it goes into the underworld to enlighten the spirits, the ancestral spirits in the underworld for the 12 hours of the night. When you swallow food, the food goes into your system, and then it goes down into the quote-unquote underworld, in the inner passages, the inner ways, to fuel the cells and so forth. Also, when you take in air, it goes through, of course, the trachea and goes inside the system and illuminates and empowers the cells, bringing oxygen and so forth to the various cells of the body and so forth, ultimately through the respiratory system in connection with the circulatory system and so forth. So the exact same thing that's happening in the imagery of ancient Kemet, Nut swallowing the sun, the Aten, Atenit, but it's going through Meretsegert or Meretsegert in the west, her western mountain peak. when we pull up, there's a specific text we want to pull up. We talked about the stele of Nefer Abu. And of course, as when we talked about the land of the West, it's the land of the setting sun, it's the gateway to the ancestral realm, the land of quote-unquote death, the land of silence, the land of the tombs, the valley of the kings and queen mothers and so forth, all of those different things. When the food goes into the system, it's going into the underworld. Eventually, it's going to have a corpse in and of itself, becoming a waste product and so forth, but the nutrients that were in the food can enliven the cells that are in the inside or the underworld of the body and so forth. So that's the same peak. Physiologically, it's the epiglottis is regulating the capacity for us to receive fuel through food, receive air, which is solar energy, fire power through the trachea, regulating the flow between that kind of fuel from both manifestations. She's the peak. The epiglottis is the peak. Our capacity to receive that energy from food as well as air is dependent on the proper functioning of Meretsegert inside of the body. Now, we want to read from that particular text, the stele of Nefer Abu, and we're going to put a link to that in the chat room right quick. Okay, and you can find this, of course, in different on different sites. This is just one of many sites. So, in the introduction, it says the deity, the goddess of the pyramidal peak. She was the guardian of the necropolis in the Valley of the Kings. In this domain of hers, she avenged misdeeds by striking criminals and oath breakers blind, but she was also known to be merciful toward the repentant. The workers at Deir el Medina called her Peak of the West, talking about Dehent Amentet. So once again, that's the peak inside the body, which is the epiglottis. That is the gateway. If you look from the front, someone opens their mouth and you look from the front, the little peak reaching up through the back, near the back of the tongue and so forth, that is the epiglottis. You can see that little peak. And that is the gateway to the quote-unquote underworld. That is the gateway to the West. That is the peak of the West. That is the Dehent Amentet. That is the shrine of Meretsegert inside your body. And she's about to regulate that flow of food and that nourishment to the underworld, to the West, to the citizens or the denizens within the spirit realm or the inner realms and so forth. But she also regulates that flow of air coming from the trachea and also regulates the voice or the sound. So she regulates the capacity for us to have silence and so forth. So they called her the Peak of the West after the place where she lived. The draughtsman Nefer Abu dedicated a stela to her in which he describes his punishment by Meretsegert and her, not forgiveness in the sense of the whites and their offspring, because there's no such thing as forgiving. There's cause and effect, but once you suffer the effects, you get yourself back in alignment, then you can reconnect. So the text says, made by the servant in the place of truth, Nefer Abu, justified of my OKRA, I was an ignorant man and foolish, who knew not good from evil. I did the transgression against the peak, talking about Meretsegert, and she taught a lesson to me. I was in her hand by night as by day. I sat on bricks like a woman in labor, talking about he was in pain. He was in her hand because she was punishing him. I called to the wind, and it came not to me. I libated to the peak of the West, Meretsegert, great of strength, and to every divinity, Toro, God and Goddess. I called upon my mistress, or the masteress or mistress, the great one, Meretsegert. I found her coming to me as a sweet breeze. She was merciful to me, having made me see her hand. She returned to me appeased. She made my malady forgotten. For the peak of the West, the Dehent Amentet is appeased if one calls upon her. So, what he's talking about, of course, is getting out of harmony with order, suffering the effects of operating out of harmony with order, suffering pain, talking about like a woman who was in labor and so forth. He was in her hand of the deity, meaning she was in control, and he couldn't break from that pain and suffering and so forth. When he calls out to the wind and every divinity, nothing happened. But then he calls upon Meretsegert, the one who desires silence, or the lover of silence and so forth. He said he found her coming to him as a breeze. Once he aligned with her, aligned with that force in nature, that contractive force in nature that regulates the flow of not only energy coming from the trachea, but also the fuel coming through the esophagus. And that's the same thing with the great Earth Mother Divinity. She's swallowing the sun at night. Newt swallows the sun, and she regulates that ingestion of that solar energy into the divine trachea and so forth, and moving through the spirit body and so forth of the Earth Mother, so we can receive that energy of the AKANFO in the spirit realm and so forth. He got in harmony with her, with the energy that she governs, regulating that flow of energy for fuel, solar energy, power, and so forth. And that solar energy manifests as our life force energy that we utilize to vitalize ourselves and give us the power to execute, overcome, these negative temptations and desires for self-destructive activity. When you have vital power, you can obliterate those misguided desires or lusts. If you don't have vital power because you disempowered yourself through engaging in self-destructive behavior or through neglect of your own spiritual work, your own spiritual cultivation, just like your physical body, you can suffer from disease because a virus came through, or you were putting yourself in a negative position by doing drugs or smoking or drinking, doing whatever, and you're assaulting yourself, and you can suffer in that regard. But you can also suffer even if you're not doing those things negative to yourself, but you're neglecting yourself. Not proper sleep is not there, proper dietary practices are not being adhered to, exercise, all these different things. If you're neglecting yourself, then you weaken your spiritual immunity as well as your physical immunity, and then the kinds of bacteria, viral agents that normally would be repelled by you with ease, they can get into your system and take you down because of neglect. Not that you're doing something negative to yourself by ingesting pollutants, but just through neglect. In the same fashion, physically, it's the same spiritually. We can engage in self-destructive behavior because we're drawn by individuals or our own misguided conditionings or malformed conditionings spiritually that we've obsessed over and so forth. And we talked about that last week. You can be drawn into that kind of behavior through deliberately through self-destructive mindsets or through neglect of your own ritual practice, neglect of your own spiritual cultivation, not silencing the voices and directions and admonitions and desires of those who are self-destructive and trying to lead you in that path. You're not silencing that. You're open to that and you're listening to that and so forth, and you're drawn in by that because your spiritual immunity is weak. You need to invoke Meretsegert so you can engage that silence. So this is what he's talking about. He got back in harmony with her, in alignment with her energy and so forth. She was merciful to me. I found her coming to me as a sweet breeze. She was merciful to me, having made me see her hand. She returned to me appeased. She made my malady forgotten. For the peak of the west, the hint Amintet Meretsegert is appeased if one calls upon her. If you seek to realign yourself, then you can get back in harmony with order. Even if you look physically and your life is dependent on this reality. The epiglottis is a flap, so to speak, and it's in the form of a hooded cobra, as we talked about, and as you can see when you look at images of anatomy and so forth. That little flap not only controls the glottal stops and so forth with regard to sound linguistically, but if it doesn't work properly and you receive food and the flap doesn't protect the trachea and the food goes down into the trachea, the drinks go down into the trachea and so forth, your life can be over rather quickly. So our lives continuing to operate naturally and us continuing to function in the world on a regular basis, Meretsegert is one of those divinities where if we're not in harmony with her, the slightest miscalculation can take us out of balance. The slightest miscalculation with your epiglottis can cause you to receive food or other, elements within your trachea. The next thing you know, you're coughing violently and so forth, trying to purge that out so that you will not succumb to suffocation and so forth. So she's a major divinity, not only physiologically, but also spiritually. If we're trying to get back in harmony with order, because we made mistakes, talking about legitimate mistakes, then we can align with Meretsegert, and she can get us back in harmony, just like she can cough up, just like a cobra can spit out venom and so forth. Something gets trapped in your trachea, you can cough that up and spit that out so you can get back in harmony with the order and start breathing normally again and so forth. You won't suffocate. When you get out of harmony with order and receive things into your spirit body, receive things into your awareness that are not in harmony with order, and you legitimately make a mistake, then you can align with Meretsegert so you can repel that. She can talk about the lover of silence. It's not only talking about the physical silence. They talk about her attacking as a cobra, as a fire-spitting serpent, causing blindness and so forth. So, even with regard physiologically, if you receive through the trachea or you receive through the esophagus, and she's regulating the flow of material coming through both of those passages, the oxygen, of course, through the trachea, that material, but then the food and liquids and so forth, that material coming through the esophagus, she's regulating the flow between the two. If you don't receive properly, as we said, then you can suffer from suffocation, illness, even death, if it's not, addressed immediately. There's also epiglottitis and so forth, where there's a swelling of the epiglottis, inflammation, and that can lead to death. It's a serious piece. The same thing is true spiritually. If you're absorbing, so you absorb air through the trachea, you absorb or consume food through the esophagus, she regulates that absorption and consumption. Spiritually, if you're absorbing energy projections from other individuals, entities, conditionings, and all of that, that's self-destructive, negative, manifesting lust or malice and so forth, and you're consuming that and trying to utilize that as an energy source to power yourself or inform yourself or move forward in your life, in certain life activities, occupations, relationships, finances, or whatever it is, but you're absorbing and consuming the trachea and the esophagus, absorbing and consuming that which is not to your best benefit, that is that which is not in harmony with order, then you're going to create pressure within yourself. You're going to create spiritual suffocation. You're going to create some kind of violent explosion spiritually, suffering from different kinds of spiritual breakdowns, implosions, explosions, and so forth. Explosive emotional reactions, implosive emotional reactions, mental instability, emotional instability, these various kinds of things. But when then you're properly nourished, fueled, and empowered, by what you absorbed and what you consume. When she's dealing with the ritual process, we're talking about cleansing the head ritually. The Okraguare, or Okraguare, when you look in the OKRA complex book, the soul of AKANFO, we're talking about the nature and function of the KA-KAIT, the soul, the deity dwelling in the head region, that spiritual force that dwells within your head region, that deity, the male divinity, if you're a male or female divinity, if you're female, that was assigned to dwell with you throughout the course of your life by the Supreme Being, that deity who's always leading you towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order. Spirituality is about aligning with that force. receiving direction from that divinity, absorbing that direction, consuming that direction from that divinity, as well as the spiritual forces that and energy complexes that divinity regulates. But if you're not in alignment, if there's some blur between the force in your head that's pulling you in one direction, you're going in the other direction. It's pulling you in another direction to engage in certain thoughts, intentions, and actions. You're going in another direction, the opposite direction, based on what other people told you you should be doing, or how you should be thinking, or how you should be operating, or who you should be connecting with, and so forth. So you're going in one direction, the deity in your head region, that force is pulling you in another direction. So there's a split, there's a discordance, there's a fracturing, and so forth. When you seek to realign, Meretsegert is part of that process. So when you reconnect with that force in the head region with the Ka, the KA-KAIT, the OKRA, she's part of that process. That realignment includes that proper absorption, that proper consumption, that repulsion of things that you shouldn't have consumed, that fire-spitting cobra, that venom-spitting cobra to cough up or repel, that which shouldn't be in your system, false ideas, falsely formed or foolishly formed, negatively formed, emotional entities and so forth, mental instability and so forth, these various things and behaviors, you cough that up, release that, reject that, and so forth. You get back in harmony through ritual practice. He talks about libating, pouring libation, and of course that's the pouring of water and so forth when you're engaged in ritual prayer, giving offerings, but then cleansing the head and sitting down to communicate with that divinity. First, we pour libation or we engage in ritual invocation, ritual prayer, ritual song, whatever it is, whatever form, to draw ritual chant and so forth, to draw the deities to us, draw the ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated to us. That's no different than getting on the phone, calling somebody so they can come to your house, and then they come to your house. And you give them some food, and they consume that. But that's just the introduction to get them there and to keep them grounded there. Then you sit down and you listen and have a dialogue for however long it takes, hours or more, to learn what you need to learn. In the same fashion, we invoke the Obosom, the deities, we evoke the ancestresses and ancestors, the Nananom Nsumanfo, those who are spiritually cultivated, to bring them and magnify their energy at our shrine so we can commune directly with them. We give offerings and so forth to align ourselves with them. And once they are present, then we sit down and then we listen. We project what's going on with us, but then we also listen and attune to the forces that regulate order in creation. We absorb that energy so we can regulate order in our lives and recalibrate ourselves when we have miscalibrated. Absorb that energy, absorb that consciousness, consume that energy, consume that wisdom and so forth, and utilize it to our best benefit. Part of that process with Meretsegert is to shut down what's coming in from the outside. And you sit down and you engage the susuhon, or the meditative process, and sometimes you're, of course, different things are streaming into your consciousness that are unrelated to what you're trying to do and so forth. Just like she shuts down the sound when you're speaking, you say het and you cut it off. She cuts off the sound, not only your own sound, your own physical sound, but also those non-physical communications, that rhetoric and so forth, those things that are flooding your consciousness. She can shut that down. She's the one, Merit, who desires Meretsegert, silence. And when she shuts those communications down, those streams of thoughts and memories and fears and whatever is going on, when she shuts those down, because she's the lover of silence and so forth, she repels what's coming in. You're no longer swallowing those things. She's cutting off the esophagus with the flap so things don't go down there. Then she cuts off what's going into the trachea and so forth. She's stopping the consumption and absorption of those things you don't need so she can engage her process, the lover of silence, shutting those things down so you can become attuned. This is happening when you sit down and begin to engage the meditative process. First, you begin the breathing process, of course. You're drawing in the life force energy. Then you're trying to work to get to her realm. You want to get to her domain, and that is that domain of pure silence. Not only physical silence from the things that's going on. It's not hard necessarily to block the physical things out. If people are outside of your building making noise and so forth, you can begin to kind of tune those out kind of easily, just like when you're watching TV or reading a book. If things are going on around you, you can kind of tune that out kind of easy, and you can focus and pay attention. But spiritually, if there are negative entities, discarnate spirits of relatives and non-relatives who are trying to influence you, or thought forms that you've plugged energy into, false thought forms based on foolish ideas that have been planted in you or that you embrace, and you keep plugging your energy into these thought forms, these luminous entities, creating a magnetic field around these forms, and they draw you into their orbit, and you become obsessed with these thought forms and so forth. Those kinds of things, trying to inform you in a negative fashion when you're trying to sit down and attune to your KA-KAIT, your soul, your divine consciousness, is Meretsegert, who repels them just like the cobra serpent spitting out those, that venom, repelling the enemy and so forth, striking them with blindness and so forth so they can't see. She's repelling those thought forms and so forth so you can retreat into her sanctuary, retreat into the Dehent Amentet, or the peak of the west, the land of the setting sun, the land of silence, the gateway to the ancestral realm. She is the lover of silence, so she can get you to that silent space. That's internally, that's physically, but also spiritually, internally, when you're sitting there at the shrine or even outside in the natural space and so forth where the natural shrines are. She's the one who's engaging that process so you can get to that space of silence, so you can begin to hear and engage that purificatory process of realigning with your Ka and Kayat without distraction. She's always been part of that process. Now when you invoke her, when you image her and you invoke her, and she will show herself to you, sometimes as a woman, sometimes as a serpent in different forms and so forth, but she'll show herself to you and show you that she's been regulating that process all along. And when you actually can contextualize what's been going on and communicate directly with her, you can get to that purified or purificatory silence, her domain, much quicker and with greater ease and with greater fluidity. And then she's regulating that silence so it's not disturbed, because she simply wants you to absorb and consume what you need to absorb and consume. Just like when she's operating through the epiglottis, she simply wants you to absorb what you need to absorb and consume what you need to consume, and things going into the proper place, the trachea and the esophagus, for your benefit. So that's when you're engaged in ritual. And when you get to that silent space and you have the capacity to hear, your hearing becomes, empowered. Your clairvoyance becomes empowered and so forth. So you can see, you can hear spiritually, you can hear those messages, you can align with the thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with order and align yourself with that, and you can repel those thoughts, intentions, and actions based on conditions internally or external projections from other entities. You can repel all of that, and you can realign yourself with order. You can appease the divinity, as Nefer Abu did. He was engaged in self-destructive behavior. He suffered for that. She had her in his hand, but then he realigned with her, got back in harmony with her, appeased her, and so forth, and then she brought him back to that sweet breeze and divine order and all these different things. So that's internally, spiritually, but that also has to do with, because that's when you're engaged in that process and you're at the shrine, this is you dealing directly with your own soul, the Ka and Kayat, and Meretsegert is facilitating that communication, helping you to block out anything that doesn't need to enter your sphere of awareness in that purificatory silence. And she's the lover of silence, she who desires silence. But then even socially, you may enter into that purificatory solitude. As we've talked about before, we've been conditioned falsely and negatively to believe that there's something inherently wrong with solitude, being alone for a certain period. So some of our people fear being alone for a certain period. They feel only validated if they're connected with somebody, even in relationship and so forth, or even connected with people socially, connected with family members all the time, or socially all the time, being around people all the time, or having a relationship and so forth, even to the point where people have a negative relationship where they're, accumulating pets and so forth and exercising, domineering, behaviors over pets just so they can have something to control. So some of our people feel like they can't be alone. That's the worst thing in the world for them to be alone for a week, for a month, for a year, for 2 years and so forth. They feel devastated by being alone. They don't understand the divinity and the purificatory power of solitude. And that is regulated by Meretsegert, where she talks about loving silence, or she who desires silence. She's a lover of silence. And silence is rooted in that notion of solitude. You're blocking everything out. You're only focused on the solitude of you and alignment with your Ka and KAIT, so you can realign yourself, recalibrate yourself, restore your thoughts, intentions, and actions to the alignment with divine order that they should be manifesting. So that silence is rooted in solitude. That's internally and spiritually, but sometimes that manifests externally. Sometimes you need to take time out away from those individuals that you are engaged with on a regular basis and focus specifically on yourself. You may need to go through an entire solar cycle so you can feel the effects of the shift of energy from spring, summer, fall, and winter, and back to spring again. So once you've purified yourself and purged yourself, just like someone going through a fast, a 7-day fast or a 21-day fast, purging themselves, purifying themselves, and so forth. And then after they've purified themselves physically, they go through a whole 365-day cycle, 365 and a quarter day cycle, an entire solar cycle, allowing the forces in nature as they manifest through the different seasons to impact them as a now recently repurified individual. So they can absorb and consume that life force energy as it manifests in different gradients throughout the course of that solar cycle, so they can be empowered by that and strengthened by that and fortified by that. So after they come out of that period of solitude, then they're a stronger, more grounded individual. And when you're a strong, grounded individual, secure individual, then when you connect with other strong, grounded, secure individuals, or you attract those kinds of individuals or people who are aspiring to that, then you can have a normal, balanced relationship. If you're not grounded to a requisite degree and you're trying to connect with other people to help ground you, no one can help ground you. Only your Ka or your KAIT grounds you. Your alignment with your Ka, your Sum, your spirit's alignment with the Ka, the KAIT, powered by the Ba and by the divine living spirit energy within you that empowers your connection to your Ka and KAIT, your soul, your divine consciousness, that is your grounding. Once you become grounded to a basic, fundamental, requisite degree, of course you're going to continue to engage in purificatory processes throughout the course of your life. But once you reach a basic, fundamental degree of grounding by aligning your spirit with your Ka, your KAIT, then you can connect with someone else who's engaged in the same process, and you can have a balanced relationship. There's not one person trying to drag the other person, force them into a position to try to help ground them spiritually. Of course, people can give advice, they can give ideas, they can point things out, they can give wise, teachings and all these different things. But when it comes to the work, it's no different than someone giving you all kinds of advice about diet and exercise and sleep, and everything they can say is 100% accurate. But at some point, you're going to have to consume the food, you're going to have to assimilate those nutrients, you're going to have to get enough sleep, you're going to have to exercise your own body, you're going to have to do the things that the people are talking about. When you talk about spiritual cultivation, people can give all kinds of great advice based on experience, but at some point, you are going to have to align your own Sum, your spirit body, with your Okraaguare, your soul, your divine consciousness, or your Sahu with your KA-KAIT, your spirit with your soul, divine consciousness, and so forth, that is something you have to do. And it begins in silence, with Meretsegert governing that. It begins in solitude, and sometimes that manifests outwardly. So that purificatory power of solitude, that is sacred. There's a deity that governs that. So when you find yourself in a position where you need to take time out, or you're positioned in a way where there's a separation that takes place, whether it's friends, family, significant others, or whatever it is, co-workers or whatever it is, and through circumstance you're forced into a position of solitude, you just entered into the realm, the domain of the sacred peak, the hint Amintet of Meretsegert. You just entered into her domain, that silence, rooted in solitude. She can take over and help you with that grounding. That is her goal. That is her job. That is her responsibility, to assist you in that grounding process through that purificatory power of solitude. So that information with regard to what her function is, where she manifests in the body, while there's a relationship between her and the West, and her and Nut, and her and Ra and Ra'et, as well as her and Ptah, when we talk about Ptah fashioning thought forms and so forth, and her aligning with, helping you align with the proper thought forms and repelling those others and so forth. All of these different relations and their manifestations in her energy complex, information the whites and their offspring have never had. They don't understand why the peak in Western Kemet is the same peak in the back of the throat where the epiglottis manifests. They don't understand her in the shape of a hooded cobra and so forth. That same hooded cobra shape is the exact shape of the epiglottis. They don't understand her in the West swallowing, just like Nut is swallowing and so forth, swallowing with the sun and is going into the underworld, and she's regulating the swallowing of the, food and liquids and so forth with regard to the trachea, and also the epiglottis cutting the trachea off with regard to air moving through the system, regulating sound, cutting off sound. When she's cutting off sound, she's the lover of silence and so forth, but then internally cutting off the sounds or voices or projections that don't need to be adhered to, but then aligning with those that do need to be adhered to when you're trying to engage that purificatory process with the Ka and the KAIT. So that information, as we said, will be included in an upcoming publication. That information, as well as the various, many of them are female divinities that we've dealt with. That most of these none of these Egyptologists have specific information, and those of our people who follow the white Egyptologists will sometimes blacken up the white Egyptologist publications and reword them and put it forward and so forth. They haven't put this information forward either because they were not aware. We can show who these deities are. They still exist. We still invoke them. They exist in the different traditions. They're part of our ritual practice, so we know exactly who they are because we have a direct relationship with them. And, of course, we can prove that and show that and verify it through the physical body and through ritual practice and everything. So before we get on the phone line, we have a few minutes left in the broadcast. Once again, the AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference, 3rd Annual, is coming up on the weekend of March 24th. We had to shift the venue, so we're still in the process of that. We should have an answer with regard to that by the end of the day tomorrow. One of the coordinators of one of the places does not come in on Monday, so we couldn't get that information, so we will at least have some answer by tomorrow night. Hopefully it'll be confirmed and so forth. But in that process, those who have been following the work, you know about the conference coming up. Of course, it's a free conference. We'll be giving away a free book, as we always do, to everyone who attends. If you would like to attend, of course, go to the AKYISAN page. But there's certain information we have to update with regard to details about the venue and the time and so forth for that weekend. We have our AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion Conference crowdfund, which is the first time we've ever done this in 3 years. for this conference to assist with the increased cost of the venue as well as the travel expense for the out-of-town presenters. And, of course, we're also going to have vendors as well throughout the day, including the vegan food vendor. So we need support with regard to that. So if you can go to the fundraiser.com page, fundraiser.com/@reversion, and you'll see that on our Facebook page as well. We have that link, and we have it on different places on the website, on the Facebook page, Kwesi Akan on Facebook. Yeah, I'd say we had a few people who contributed. I think we had about 7 people who contributed so far, but that will greatly assist us with regard to the venue as well as the travel expense. So we need that ASAP as soon as possible. We really want to have everything locked down by the end of the day tomorrow, which has been on our Tuesday and so forth. And tomorrow also, as we will talk about on our broadcast, is the first day of our POE 13-day purification observance, which is always between March 12th and 24th or March 13th and March 25th, depending on the year. And we'll get into detail about that Apo Afashe, Apo Festival ritual observance on tomorrow's broadcast. Okay, so on the phone line, Michiawo number 0217, you had a question or a comment?
Yes. Good night, Brother Kwesi. You mentioned using words like head to clear the mind or cut off like negative and intrusive toxins.
Could you say that again? The sound was a little bit muffled.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
That's a little bit better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned using the words head to clear the mind and cut off like negative and intrusive thought forms while meditating. Do you specifically have like guided meditation video that demonstrates specifically how to go about this form of meditation?
No, we don't have a guided meditation video as of yet. Well, the only thing that we have with regard to some audio is when you go if you go to the Akumasa page on our website, that's one of the pages where the link is. The Akumasa, and that's AKUMA, Akuma, and then Sa, SAA. And actually this link is on different pages. So Akuma Sa or Akuma Dina, Akuma Tra, but the Akuma Sa page is the substance abuse abstinence in the Afuraitkaitnit community. We have Akuma Dine dealing with domestic abuse neutralization, and also Akuma Tra, which is trauma recovery alignment. But there's a ritual process, the Kum method, whereas Kuku Tuntum, Uben Shang, Wabojida, and the Mpaibo piece. And the Mpaibo is a ritual prayer. So we have the ritual prayer that focus on aligning with the Okra, and it's ritual prayer. And we have the audio saying the prayer in the language. That's part of the document.
I've downloaded the prayer. Is that the Mpai?
Right, that Mpaibo or the Kumpaibo document.
Right. The link to the audio is not functional because I did that like some time ago. Once I downloaded the prayer. Okay,
so I can recheck that and see. I'll check to see what's going on with the audio. But yeah, that one in particular is what we have right now. In fact,
okay.
Check to make sure we have. Yes, that's the only thing as far as audio we have right now. We also had a audio of a specific prayer in the language of ancient Kemet. Let me see. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
No, actually, so go to the, okay, I'll put the link in the chat room right quick. Well, you may not be, are you in the chat room? In fact, just send me a link.
Okay.
Okay, if anybody, send a link if you want that link to the document we're talking about. What it is it's a prayer in the language, the English translation, but also the language of the Akhan, a ritual prayer to align with the OKRA, the soul, divine consciousness. So there's an English translation, the prayer also in the Tree, Akhan language, but then there's a link to the audio, so I can resend you that because I just clicked on it and it is working. So maybe you had an older document, but just send me an email via Facebook. I can send that link directly to you.
Okay. My other question was related to the soul washing, the soul washing.
Okay.
And because I saw where at some point you mentioned that in other broadcasts that you do it at the river, but then how is that performed like in your home? I mean, are you doing this at a altar? Because I mean, I could see how it could be done for like a young child, but don't.
So typically, like a ritual like that, typically was done and can still be done at a river or body of water. But we also have a shrine, a vessel of water on the shrine specifically for that purpose. You may not be able to get to a river or, a place of, a lake or something like that. So we have a vessel of water that we engage that ritual prayer over before we engage the Okraguare process, and we utilize that water to cleanse the head in that fashion. So, and we typically do that at least on a weekly basis on the Krada, on the Soul Daily Akhan tradition. Okay. So, but yeah, you would have the shrine for the Okra and the Kradim Obosom. That's the same shrine, and that vessel of water would be for that specifically. We talk about some of that in detail in the back of the book, the Okra complex. There's a Okraaguare section in that book, so we talk about that in there. But yeah, vessel of water specifically for that. And then if you do go to a river, you can do the same thing out there with the water in the river.
Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thank you so much for answering.
Okay. Appreciate the call. Okay, so we have, hold on 1 second. Okay, Michelle on the phone line, number 7412. You had a question or comment?
Hey, heads up, Brother Kwesi. First, I want to say I appreciate this particular, I appreciate all the broadcasts, but this one in particular, I'm definitely about to send to a good friend of mine who's going through this process, right now. Or at least, she's going through she's going through everything that you're speaking about right now as far as solitude, silence for, the purpose of, purification. And I'm going to probably send this out to her to see if, as just encouragement. This is like right on time. But I wanted to get your insight on a conversation I've been seeing come up lately as far as the whole Black Panther movie and so on and so forth, and the group of the warrior women that are in the movie, and there's a lot of people who are saying that they got the idea of the Dora Milaje or whatever, what they call them in the movie, from warrior women from different African societies, like from out of the Dahomey and the Amazon, and they speak of like Queen Hatshepsut and, just a host of women and warrior women within, coming from out of the continent, and how they're like conflating or merging or, speaking of the women in that movie in that, in that vein. And there's like all of these conflicting views that I've been seeing. I just wanted to get like your take on that, because I know that we've had women, I know that we have, women who know how to fight, they know how to get busy, so on and so forth. But this is a Hollywood, film, and it's like I'm not so sure the way in which they're depicting the women in the movie gives like a full scope, or like truly addresses the real context in which something like that should be viewed, as far as our women, our sisters actually having warrior classes or warrioress classes. So I just want to see if you could kind of like expound on that a little.
Okay, yeah. So, and in fact, we did a short blog. We posted it on Facebook, and then we posted it on our blog site, the og.sim.wordpress.com blog. We called it the Black Panther Non-Review Review, and we talked a little bit about it on the broadcast. But the key with regard to them, yes, on one hand, they did use the model from ancient Dahomey and the sisters who were the warriorist class, defenders of the king and so forth. But it's always the whites and offspring, of course, as spirits of disorder. They incarnate as spirits of disorder without exception. That's why we call them Achiwadiefo, spirits that are repulsed or repelled or taboo and so forth by nature. It's always subversive. So the purpose of them placing them in the movie, they had a homosexual, dissexual scene between two of them in the movie. It was cut out deliberately. At first they were going to promote it. Then they pretended like they didn't want to promote it, and then they left the scene on the cutting room floor. All the LGBT, faggot dyke community were in an uproar around the country and around the world. And now, of course, with the sequel, they're going to fully develop that story, because that was something that was included in the comic strip. Once Ta-Nehisi Coates began writing for the comic strip, he brought in two feminists and so forth who were promoting that nonsense, and they created the world of Wakanda, which is a subplot, and it included a lesbian relationship between two of the females. That's why that was in the movie. They filmed it. One of the actresses, who was one of the sisters who was a warrioress, she said she was upset that it was, left on the cutting room floor, but hopefully in the sequel it will come forward. So it's all a setup to promote this sexuality, homosexuality, get everybody excited, falling in love with Lupita and all these different people and the strong women and everything else. $1 billion+ already spent on the movie. Get everybody excited. Millions of our people rushing out and dressing up, playing djembes at movie theaters and all this nonsense. And then when the sequel comes and they highlight the sisters up front, and the Black Panther will be more in the background, but it will be focused on the women, and everybody will be so excited, and they'll rush and take their children, and millions of people will be all sitting in a mass brainwashing session to accept this sexuality, homosexuality, in the guise of warriorist black women fighting for an African nation. That's the whole point of the movie, to promote this sexuality, homosexuality, to promote revolutionary action by placing, idiocy and, self-destructive kind of demonic behaviors in Killmonger, and even naming the person Killmonger. You know what I'm saying? So they're going to promote that anybody who's talking about resolution against the whites and offspring is demonic and is a Killmonger. They're going to promote dissexuality, homosexuality, and they're going to promote the white Jesus Savior, CIA is the savior and the ally, as opposed to the one we should be executing. So that's their MO for every film that they've ever produced. They're always going to promote these things. Anybody who's anti-white, promoting dissexuality, and promoting the white savior, promoting integration. It's the same script in everything that they've ever put out, whether it's a movie, television show, song, short story, quote-unquote history, pseudo-religion. It's all the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hey, that's exactly how how I've seen it for myself. And, just to add on briefly, I also noticed that, the way in which, and you said this so many times on, the different broadcasts, is the different ways that people can actually wage war or engage in battle. Some may be out on the front lines in the field. Others may know how to, work it from a whole nother, from a whole other angle. And that's, whether it's, like you speak about the biological aspect, just different ways to engage, whether it's direct or indirect. And I see that there's like a lot of pride being taken in just the one way in which, warfare is expressed, in that movie, and the fact that they're constantly pushing the idea that a strong woman can only be that if she is like very physically aggressive or, things of that nature, as if the strength of a woman can't be expressed in a number of ways without her sacrificing her, her essence as a woman. So I just kind of like find it, questionable, myself. And, yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I think people need to, have that type of understanding when they're going to watching these types of, when these types of films, that, that's what they're about when they're pushing these type of agendas. So, yeah, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Ahmed, I'll say we appreciate the call.
All right, thank you. That's it.
Yes, that's a very good point, and it's always solved by the cosmology. So when we look at, for example, in the Akhan tradition, the 7 days of the week, and the Obosom that animates the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week, and you have, for example, today is Joda, or woman born on Joda is Ajua, set operating through the moon. On Ben Nadal, Abinadal, Tuesday, you have the planet Abinah, the female divinity that animates that force, that planetary body, is Abinah, who is Sekhmet, Sechiman Akhan, Sekhmet or Sechimet in ancient Kemet. She's a fiery warrioress, lioness divinity. Ajwa Set is a cooler maternal divinity, but she's also a healeress, but she can use that healing capacity to kill our enemies, poison our enemies, and so forth. Can be a stern mother, protective mother as well. That cool maternal energy and so forth. You have Nebet Het, who is Akua on Wednesdays. You have Ya and Abba, which is Wachet and Nekabet on Thursdays. Yauda, Abada, you have Het Heru, Afi, Afua on Fida on Friday. You have also Het Heru as Minmini or Amiminiwa on Saturday and so forth. So these different energy complexes, some of them are healeress type energies, some are warrioress, some are communicators, some are, builders and so forth. Every different energy complex based on the divinity that governs us is manifest, is useful, is necessary, just like every organ in the body. These different organs in our bodies have male and female expressions. The different organs in the divine body of the Supreme Being have these different expressions and so forth. So we have fiery sisters, we have earthy sisters, we have watery sisters, we have all the different energy complexes, and they're all a manifestation of Afuraitkaitnit womanhood. So that's key. And the brother was right. It's not just one expression of a strong black woman. There are many expressions. And when you look at the book, our book, OBAATAN, Afuraitkaitnit Womanhood, and we go through the 7 principal values of womanhood based on the 7, planetary bodies that govern this 7-day week and the female forces that govern those 7 principal values. And, of course, as we said earlier, that book was informed by 14 different sisters. I simply scribed the book, but the experiences are coming from these 14 different Afuraitkaitnit women, giving their input and their experience to the manifestation of these forces in creation in their own lives, and therefore how it, nourishes those principal values of womanhood. So when you have, in the book, you'll see that information. You can download that book for free, the ebook version. Of course, we have the softcover version as well. that goes into detail about that and showing these different expressions of Afuraitkaitnit womanhood based on energy complexes, deities that govern the heads of our different, the different sisters. So we're a little bit over time, so we're going to end the broadcast here. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, just send us an email via Facebook. We'll connect there. We have another obligation now, so we have to end the broadcast now. So again, Yerase, for tuning into the broadcast, please support the AKYISAN Ancestral Religious Reversion crowdfund so we can get everything in place by tomorrow. And we appreciate those who have already contributed. And Yerase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. And Yebeshiabio, we will meet again.